Good afternoon, Year 5. Welcome to your next reading for pleasure time. Today we're going to read Matthew Saeed's sequel. The table tennis champion and author who wrote You Are Awesome has produced this book, My Awesome Guide to Getting Good at Stuff. I know a number of you bought this book or used your World Book Day voucher to get this book. So if you've got it at home, dig it out and read along with us. Hopefully you're going to enjoy it. Today we're going to start with the introduction, which is on page 6. Hope you enjoy it. My mum had to send out a search party to find me, not once but twice in my life. The second time was after a mix-up on a bus to Norway from my house in Reading. You might have read about this in my book, You Are Awesome, but if you haven't, don't worry. The short version is that I got on the bus to the wrong Bergen and ended up lost in a motorway lay-by in northern Germany, rather than arriving at the Norwegian town called Bergen, where I was supposed to be training for table tennis. That time my mum was more worried than she was furious. After all, she had bought the bus ticket in the first place to the wrong Bergen, so surely she had to shoulder some of the blame for that one. But the first time it happened, she was mad. So angry, in fact, that I thought she might explode. Even angrier than when my brother landed a magnet on my head during an ill-advised experiment to see if it would stick to our bedroom ceiling. It didn't, and my head was bleeding for nearly a week. But where were we? Oh yes, a search party. Yes, the police had been called to look for me. I had left the house with my brother at 4 p.m. By 9 p.m. we still weren't back. Understandably, my mum was pretty concerned. In truth, there was no need for any search party. We were less than 200 metres from the house. But we didn't know that. She could have shouted us, and we would have heard. But she didn't know that. We were just doing the network. My mum had no idea about the network. Let's try and keep it that way. Thankfully, I don't think she's eligible for a World Book Day voucher, so I doubt she'll be reading this. I lived in a town called Reading, on a very normal street with lots of other very similar houses, with similar gardens surrounded by lots of very similar roads, with more similar houses and gardens. You might say it was a network of very ordinary living arrangements. Do you see where I'm going with this? Anyway, most of the children on my street were brilliant at table tennis. That was no accident. We had the best club and the best coach at the end of the road, and we played all the time. But sometimes, after playing table tennis, we would decide to do the network on the way home. The network was a kind of game. We invented it by accident when we discovered a whole series of overgrown paths weaving between and behind the houses in our neighbourhood. We literally tripped over it when we tried to take a shortcut home one day and ducked behind a garage at the top of the street to see what was there. To our amazement, we found an old path that didn't look like it had been used for years. It was overrun with wiry bushes, but it had a small opening, just wide enough to jam ourselves through. And that is how we discovered the network. A very thorny maze of passageways running behind all the back gardens. We realised that you could go into it at one end, and after crawling under branches and swerving a few wasps' nests, pop out on the other side of the block of roads. The whole idea of the network was to enter it on one street and race each other to get to one of the other exits on a totally different street. The potential to get lost was high, so whenever we did the network, one of 3 things usually happened. Number 1, we got shouted at by Mr. Dixon, who lived next to the only entry point to the network that went down the side of a house rather than a garage. He used to put his rubbish bin at what he thought was the end of a short path next to his house, but it was actually an entrance to the network, and we always knocked his bin over as we scrambled through the bushes. It was a metal one, and it made a noise like a steel band when it crashed to the ground. Mr. Dixon didn't appear to enjoy this particular steel band. It made him shout a lot. Number 2, we managed to navigate our way to the Great Frisbee Collector, aka a huge tree in my back garden. The GFC was high and impossible to climb, and over the years we had thrown countless tennis balls, footballs and frisbees into the top branches, where they remained forevermore. It looked like a badly decorated Christmas tree, and the baubles could have stocked a whole sports shop. You could see it for miles. Right by the GFC, the network forked into two, with one path coming out of the side of our garage, a fail-safe route home. We ended up entangled somewhere we didn't recognise at all. Then a wrong turn would happen, and another. By then we'd be totally lost, and although this was all going on in the undergrowth hidden within the block where we all lived, it was always a shock to pop out somewhere totally unexpected. Number 3 happened the night the search party was called. On this particular evening, we left the table tennis club at 5:30 p.m. to get home for dinner. We were excited about dinner because my mum had promised to try out a new shape of pasta, the one with the bows, and we were starving. But we decided to do the network on the way home. The thing is, it was winter, so it was really dark and cold, and we'd never done the network in the dark. It turns out there was a good reason for that. We couldn't see the frisbee tree. Someone somewhere took a wrong turn and we all followed, and suddenly, after quite a few scratches from some unforeseen rosebush, we popped out. But we didn't recognise where we were. There were no mobile phones with maps on back then, so we were all well and truly lost. Although we weren't really, we were still on the block, 200 metres from our house. And if we'd looked at the street signs, we would have known that and walked home in 2 minutes flat. But we didn't. We carried on in the network, getting more and more lost. In the end, we were in the network for about 2 hours. When we heard the police sirens, we popped out on the street to see what the commotion was about. Only then did we realise we were back on Avalon Road and less than 30 seconds from home. My brother and I ran back and tried to walk in casually through the front door as if nothing was amiss. That failed. We were covered in mud and my brother had managed, don't ask me how, to get a worm in his hair. And that's when my mum went bananas. So what on earth has this got to do with getting good at stuff? Well, if you happen to have read You Are Awesome, you'll know the story about how so many people on my street in Reading got to be brilliant table tennis players. But if you haven't read it yet, let's have a quick recap. The most important bit is that it wasn't by chance that the England table tennis team mainly consisted of kids from my road. It happened because we all wanted to practice, had the opportunity to practice, and all did the practice. We had a great coach and a great table tennis club at the end of our road. So my street wasn't blessed by some freak alien who was making everyone good at table tennis. We were doing it ourselves, with our dedication and a bit of luck. I'm letting you know about the network because it tells us something similar. My brother and I talked about it for hours once. My mum had stopped yelling. We had hours to kill. We were sent to our rooms for the whole weekend. Navigating the network had been impossible at first. A small wrong turning could take us on a totally different path to the one we expected. We had to deal with the unfamiliar terrain and find our way back from a different place. But over time, we got really good at the network. In my next life, I want to come back as a racehorse because I'm absolutely brilliant at jumping over hedges and bushes. If we meet, ask me to show you. I honestly think I could win the Grand National. But the network taught me some more important stuff too. When you do something often, even if it is hard at first, especially if it's hard, the progress you can make is staggering. You can end up being far better than you might have ever imagined. Your ability to see patterns and find a route to your destination or goal gets easier every time you do something. In fact, the wiring in your brain actually changes as you do things that are difficult, so that the next time you'll find it easier. Things often don't quite go as you imagined. Don't panic. If you've done the hard work and tried your best, you'll learn from any mistakes and be stronger next time. Don't give up. If we had, we'd still be somewhere in an alleyway off Moor Corpse Close. And try not to get a worm in your hair, ever. The slime is impossible to get rid of. Now, maybe you've only picked this book up because it was free, and you decided that if it isn't that good, you can always use it to wedge your bedroom door shut. Or maybe, just maybe, you are a tiny bit curious about getting good at stuff. So stick with me and let's get on with it. I'm going to let you in on some more secrets to success. Read on. And chapter 1 is called Let's Burst Some Myths. We will read chapter 1 tomorrow. Have a good afternoon, and I'll see you then.